In June 2013, a wall of water and rock swallowed an entire Himalayan town in a matter of minutes. When the roar finally stopped and the mud settled, almost nothing was left standing. Almost nothing, except one 1,200-year-old temple to Lord Shiva. And behind it, wedged into place as if set there by an unseen hand, stood a single massive boulder that had split the flood in two. Everything around it was erased. Hotels, homes, roads, thousands of lives, gone in one night. But the temple did not fall. They call it the greatest disaster in the history of the Himalayas. And at the very center of it stands a mystery that scientists and believers have argued over ever since. How did this one small stone temple survive when the entire valley around it was wiped off the map? Stay with me, because the answer sits at the crossroads of hard geology and something the pilgrims here have believed for 1,000 years. To understand the miracle, you first have to understand the danger. Kedarnath sits high in the Garhwal Himalayas, in the North Indian state of Uttarakhand, at an altitude of nearly 3,600 meters, almost 12,000 feet above the sea. It is one of the most sacred places in all of Hinduism, and reaching it has never been easy. For centuries, pilgrims have walked the final steep miles on foot, climbing through thin mountain air to stand before the god. But this beauty hides a brutal truth. Kedarnath sits in a narrow valley carved by the Mandakini River, and that river is fed by melting glaciers and monsoon rain pouring down from the peaks above. Directly above the town lies the Korabari Glacier, and a small glacial lake that sits like a bowl of meltwater held back by nothing but loose rock and ice. For most of the year, the danger sleeps. But when the monsoon collides with the mountains, this valley becomes one of the deadliest funnels on Earth. Any water that falls up high is only one way to go, straight down, gathering speed, gathering rock, aimed like a cannon at the town below. For generations, the people here trusted the mountains and trusted the god they had come to worship. The temple had stood for over 1,000 years. Nothing, they believed, could touch Kedarnath. In June of 2013, that belief was about to be tested in the most terrifying way imaginable. But before the flood, let's stand before the temple itself, because it is far stranger and far older than it first appears. Kedarnath is one of the 12 Jyotirlingas, the 12 most sacred shrines of Shiva in the world, places where the god is said to have appeared as a pillar of pure light. To visit all 12 is the journey of a lifetime. Kedarnath is the highest and the hardest of them all. The temple is built from enormous gray stone slabs, some weighing many tons, fitted together with astonishing precision. And here is the first surprising fact. There is no cement, no mortar, no glue of any kind. The entire structure is held together only by the weight and the cut of the stones themselves, locked into one another like a giant puzzle. How the builders lifted and placed these massive blocks at this altitude over 1,000 years ago is a genuine feat of ancient engineering. Legend traces the temple back even further to the Pandavas, the heroes of the Mahabharata, who are said to have first sought Shiva here. In this story, Shiva, unwilling to face them, took the form of a bull and tried to vanish into the ground. What remained above the surface, the hump of the bull, is what devotees worship at Kedarnath to this day. That is why the deity here is not a smooth, carved idol, but a rough, natural cone of rock. What history can confirm is that the great philosopher Adi Shankaracharya re-established this temple in roughly the 8th century, which places the structure we see today at around 1,200 years old. And there is another detail that makes Kedarnath unlike almost any temple on Earth. For roughly half the year, no one worships here at all. The winters are so brutal that the temple is sealed shut and buried in snow, and the presence of the deity is carried down the mountain in a sacred palanquin to a lower village, where the prayers continue until spring. Only when the snows retreat, around late April, are the great doors reopened and the pilgrims return. Kedarnath is also one of the Panch Kedar, 5 sacred Shiva sites scattered across these peaks, and a jewel of the Char Dham pilgrimage, which is the reason that every single summer, hundreds of thousands of people pour into this one narrow, fragile valley. 1,200 years of Himalayan winters. 1,200 years of earthquakes, snow, and storms. And in all that time, it never fell. Remember that mortar-free construction. Remember the interlocking stone. Because when the water came, those ancient details would mean the difference between standing and vanishing. In the second week of June 2013, the monsoon arrived early, and it arrived angry. For days, rain hammered the Uttarakhand Himalayas, far more and far faster than the mountains could absorb. The ground was already saturated. The rivers were already swelling. And high above Kedarnath, the Korobari glacial lake was filling past its limit. And the timing could not have been crueler. June is the very peak of the pilgrimage season. The valley was not empty, it was packed. Tens of thousands of pilgrims, porters, guides, and shopkeepers filled the town and the trails. Far more people than the mountain had any business holding. When the water came, it did not come for an abandoned ruin. It came for a living, crowded town at the busiest moment of its year. Then, on the night of the 16th and into the 17th of June, two disasters struck at almost the same time. First, a violent cloudburst, a sudden, concentrated dump of rain, unloaded onto the slopes above the town. And then, under all that pressure, the natural dam holding back the Korobari Lake gave way. In an instant, the entire lake emptied down the mountain at once. What came down the Mandakini Valley that morning was not a flood in the way most of us picture one. It was a moving wall, water, mud, and boulders the size of cars and houses, thundering downhill at unimaginable speed. Witnesses described a roar like 100 aircraft. The ground itself shook, and in a matter of minutes, this debris flow slammed into Kedarnath town. Buildings that had stood for decades were torn from their foundations and swept away. Ghost houses packed with pilgrims, shops, roads, whole rows of concrete lodges, gone as if they had never existed. The official toll across the region climbed into the thousands. It became known, grimly, as the Himalayan tsunami. By the time the sun rose fully on the 17th, the town of Kedarnath had, for all practical purposes, ceased to exist. Except for one thing. Before I show you what the survivors saw when the mist cleared, take 1 second. If you're this far into the story, you already know this channel is for you. Subscribe to Stories of Wisdom. Every week I dig into one of these mysteries, the temples, the disasters, the things history and science can't fully explain. It's free, and it's the only way YouTube knows to bring you the next one. Now, let's go back to that morning. When the water finally slowed, and the survivors dared to look, they saw a landscape that made no sense. Where a bustling temple town had stood the day before, there was now a gray desert of mud and shattered stone. Cars were folded like paper. Entire buildings had been reduced to their concrete skeletons or erased completely. And in the middle of that devastation, untouched, stood the Kedarnath temple. Its walls were intact. Its towers still rose against the mountains. The god was still inside. The images went around the world within hours. A single ancient stone temple, standing calm and whole, in the center of one of the worst natural disasters in India's modern history. For the survivors who had climbed to its walls for shelter, and for the millions who saw the photographs, there was only one word for it: a miracle. But survival, for the living, was far from over. Tens of thousands of people were now trapped high in the mountains. Roads gone, bridges gone, cut off by cliffs and floodwater with no way down. What followed became one of the largest rescue operations the country had ever launched. For days, military helicopters threaded through narrow, storm-blown valleys, lifting the stranded out a handful at a time, while soldiers carried the injured and the exhausted down broken trails on foot. Many waited days in the cold and the rain, with almost nothing, before help arrived. And through all of it, the temple stood at the center of the ruin like an anchor, the one fixed point in a world that had lost everything else. But when the engineers and geologists finally reached the site, they found something behind the temple that turned the miracle into a mystery. A single object that, they realized, may have saved the entire structure. A giant rock, directly behind the Kedarnath temple, on the uphill side. the side facing the oncoming flood, sat an enormous boulder that had not been there before. It was massive, taller than a person, weights measured in the tens of tons. And it was lodged in exactly the worst possible place for the flood and the best possible place for the temple, right in the path of the debris, a few meters behind a shrine. The devotees gave it a name almost immediately. They call it the Bhim Shila, the rock of Bhima, the mightiest of the Pandava heroes, and also the Divya Shila, the divine rock. Because of where it landed, the story tells itself. As the wall of water and rock came roaring down the mountain, this one giant boulder wedged into place behind the temple and acted like the prow of a ship. It split the flow. The deadly torrent of mud and stone was forced to divide and rush past the temple on either side, leaving the building in a kind of shadow, a pocket of stillness in the middle of the destruction. Today, that rock is worshipped. Pilgrims climb to it, press their hands against it, and thank it for saving the god's home. But a rock that arrives at the exact right moment, at the exact right spot, to save a 1,200-year-old temple, is that devotion or is that physics? The scientists have an answer, and so do the believers. And this is where the two paths split. Let's take the scientist's path first, because it is genuinely fascinating, and it does not require any miracle at all. Geologists who studied the site point to several cold, physical facts working together. First, the boulder itself. In a debris flow, the largest, heaviest rocks often travel at the front and the base of the flow, and they are the first to come to rest when the slope eases or an obstacle appears. A boulder that size grounding out just above the temple is unusual, but it is not supernatural. It is exactly the kind of thing large debris flows do. And consider what it was standing against and what it wasn't. The modern town was built of concrete, brick, and steel, rigid and brittle, planted right down in the path of the river. When a debris flow that violent hits a rigid wall, the wall does not bend. It shatters, or it is torn off its foundation hole. That is precisely what happened to the ghost houses and the lodges. The temple, by contrast, was low, heavy, rounded smooth by centuries, and built of locked stone that could shift a little without breaking. In pure engineering terms, the ancient shrine was simply better built to survive a flood than the modern town around it, even though no one who raised it 12 centuries ago could ever have planned for this. Second, its position. Once that boulder locked into place uphill of the temple, it genuinely would have deflected the flow, shielding whatever sat directly behind it. This is a known effect. Large obstacles create a protected wake, a calmer zone downstream. Third, the temple's own design. Remember those massive interlocking stones with no mortar? A rigid, cemented wall can crack and collapse when hit. But a mortar-free structure of heavy, locked stone can absorb a shock and flex, letting water pass through gaps rather than shattering. The very thing that makes Kedarnath such an ancient engineering marvel may also be what let it survive a modern catastrophe. And the temple sits on a raised stone platform, which lifted it slightly above the worst of the scouring flow. Put those together, a shielding boulder, a protected wake, a flexible mortar-free build on high ground, and you have a complete, rational explanation for how one building survived while the modern concrete town around it was destroyed. Case closed? Not for everyone. Because the people who have prayed here for 1,000 years look at the very same facts and see something the geology leaves out. To the devotees, the science is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. Yes, they say, a boulder split the flow. Yes, the mortar-free stone held. But look at the timing. Look at the placement. Of all the millions of tons of rock crashing down that valley, the one boulder that mattered came to rest in the one spot that could save the god's own house, and no other. To them, that is not luck. That is Shiva protecting his home. The same god who, in the ancient story, took the form of a bull and pressed himself into this mountain, standing firm, once again, against a force that erased everything else. And there is an older belief that makes them even more certain. For centuries, people have said that Kedarnath is protected, that it has survived disaster before and will again. Which brings us to the strangest claim of all, the one that says this is not even the first time the temple should have been destroyed. There is a theory, and I want to be careful, because it lives somewhere between geology and legend, that Kedarnath once survived something even longer than a flood. Some researchers have suggested that during a cold period several centuries ago, roughly from the 1300s onward, this whole region was buried under snow and glacial ice, and that the temple spent as long as 400 years entombed, frozen, and completely covered. Their evidence? Marks on the temple's stones, certain lines, and a smooth, polished sheen on the rock that, they argue, are exactly the kind of scars left behind by the slow, grinding movement of a glacier over its surface. If that is true, then this temple did not just survive one flood. It survived being swallowed by an ice age, buried in the dark and the cold for 4 centuries, and emerged, when the ice finally retreated, still standing. Now, is that proven? No. It is a claim, debated by experts, and I won't tell you it is settled fact. But it is part of why the people here speak about Kedarnath the way they do. To them, this is a temple that simply refuses to die. So how did Kedarnath survive when the valley around it did not? If you are a geologist, the answer is a chain of natural events, each one explainable. A heavy boulder grounding uphill, a protected wake, flexible ancient stone, elevated ground. Remove the word miracle, and every piece still fits. If you are a devotee, every one of those facts is true, and yet the pattern behind them, the impossible precision of it, is the hand of Shiva refusing to let his home fall. And here is the honest truth. The science does not disprove the faith, and the faith does not deny the science. The boulder is real. The mechanics are real. And the fact that they lined up, on that one night, to spare this 1,000-year-old shrine, that is a fact too. What it means is the one thing no instrument can measure. Maybe it was geology. Maybe it was grace. Maybe, in a place like this, those two words were never as far apart as we think. In the years after the disaster, Kedarnath was slowly rebuilt. The paths were cleared, the debris removed, the way reopened. And the pilgrims came back, in larger numbers than ever before. But now, when they arrive, there is a new stop on the journey. Before or after they enter the temple, they climb to the great boulder resting behind it. They garland it. They light lamps at its base. They press their foreheads to the cold stone that stood in the path of the flood. The rock that geologists call a debris flow deposit, the pilgrims call the divine rock, the guardian that Shiva sent to hold back the end of the world for one more day. Both of them are looking at the same gray stone. And maybe that is the real lesson of Kedarnath. That a mountain can send down a wall of death, and a single rock, in the right place, at the right moment, can teach 1 million people to believe again. The town was rebuilt from nothing. The temple never needed to be. It was already standing. It had been standing for 1,200 years. And after everything the mountain could throw at it, it is standing still. If you made it all the way here, thank you. You didn't just watch a disaster. You sat with a mystery, and those are getting rarer. Do 2 things for me. Subscribe, so the next mystery finds you. And tell me in the comments, when you look at that rock behind the temple, do you see geology, or do you see God? There is no wrong answer. I go back and forth myself. I'll see you in the next one. This has been Stories of Wisdom.